Hello, and welcome to Transition Tea, the podcast dedicated to demystifying the world of healthcare transition and activation planning. I'm Kelly Guzman, your host, and I'm the president and CEO of Jolla Consulting. Today, I am honored to have Robert joining us. So, Kim, welcome to the podcast. Can you please provide our listeners with a bit of your background?
Thank you, Kelly. It's my honor to be on this podcast. So my background is I'm currently Senior Director of Clinical Services at Scripps Memorial Hospital in La Jolla. I've been in healthcare administration for about 30 years, and I'm currently over about a third of all the clinical areas at our hospital, along with being the project manager for our new tower.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for that. So during our chat today, we're going to be drinking Moringa Mint tea.
Cheers.
So I had a quick sip, and it is absolutely delicious, and I'm telling you that. I love Moringa. It's a superfood. So listeners, go ahead and grab a cup and join us for a transition talk. So Kim, tell us about your first job in healthcare, or what led you to a career in healthcare?
Well, does being a candy striper when you're 12 count? My first paid job was as an aide at a small community hospital. And it made me realize how much I liked the interaction with both the patients and the providers. And I opted at that point to go ahead and apply to graduate school. And I was planning to be a physical therapist and work with children because I just thought that would be the greatest job ever. And then I went to a wonderful lecture at University of California, San Francisco with a group of certified nurse midwives. And I thought, wow, that looks really interesting. But I have no experience, and I'm not sure if that's a good fit for me. So I joined the Peace Corps and worked as an adjunct to a midwife. And then I taught, helped create a nursing curriculum for students for 2 more years to go to nursing school in West Africa. But what I realized when I was there, I was really good at putting pieces together. Save the Children, World Health were always saying, hey, we need some information, some data, some projects. And as Peace Corps volunteers, so we did kind of anything that was asked of us. And I realized that was sort of my gift. So came back, went to graduate school and moved back to California, where I grew up, and got a job and started working in hospitals. And, the rest is history. I've been doing it forever.
What was your graduate degree study?
Well, my master's was in public health. Because I really wanted to understand the whole dynamics of both the community, and my specialization was, of course, in hospital administration, but you wanted to see how all the pieces fit together, both epidemiology, infection control. And to me, I liked sort of the big strategic piece of it.
I love it. Well, speaking of strategic, so we've worked with you on several projects opening up healthcare facilities, the Previs Tower, and then the ambulatory area. So can you share with the audience your experience with transition, strategic planning and construction?
Well, I have been so lucky. I started off, as you said, just being on the hospital side, being the liaison with our about 400,000 foot tower and working with your group, which was eye-opening. And then as time evolved, I got to be involved with design of our 50,000 square foot new emergency room and imaging center in that same building. It had been shelved. And then I started doing the more of the dress rehearsals and learning about how to work with teams to help them sort of learn their new facility. So I've got to do it all. And it's been a phenomenal journey. I was thinking about that this morning, and it's going on 9 years since I started working with your group. And so I still am doing it. I, took over after we built all our buildings, or we thought we did, and started doing the facilities and the moving. And then we got funding to do another tower. So it started all over again. So we're just finishing the design phase, and the building is just about to be skinned, which means they're going to put the outside on it. So feel like I'm, back in the cycle, but I love it because there's a beginning and a middle and end. And, you can really see in the design phase, pulling in the bedside providers, the nurses and physicians, the RTs and PTs to help you design to make it make sense from both their perspective and the patient perspective. And what a wonderful thing to do. What a great, legacy to leave, is that these people are going to work in an environment that they helped create.
Love that. So we've worked with you on 2 big projects, and then, as you mentioned, you did the emergency department on your own. So what were the differences, and then were there any special tools that were really helpful for you when you were doing this by yourself?
Well, I remember really saying often when we first started with your group was follow the process. We've never done this, they've done this. And creating the critical task list is probably my favorite thing, because I love lists. I have lists at home and lists at work, but it's the ability to track where you are, who made the decisions, what's occurring, current state, and then what's your projected timeline for finishing. And I really think that helps keeps you on track, even though it's a giant spreadsheet of 10,000 items. It still allows you to kind of go back and go, okay, this impacts this, so we have to complete this, even though people are wanting to jump ahead. And it really allows for a much smoother sequela. I think that and workflow are my 2 favorites, because even though you think it's going to be one way because you're living in a current world, you have to remind them, wait a minute, the dynamics, your proprioception in your new space is quite different. And you need to think that through. So I definitely love the critical task list. And I think the workflow and creating scenarios that challenge you to think about how you're going to work differently, it's quite remarkable. People don't actually get it until they move in and go, oh yeah, now I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. So you opened up an emergency department, and I worked in emergency department, and I think the staff have a reputation of being a little tough to work with, just because of the dynamics of the work that they do. So what advice do you have for anybody who is activating a new emergency department? And, you talked about current state and looking at the future state. So there's definitely change. So, and in our experience, nobody likes change. Even the people who think they like change don't like it. They struggle through it, and then they embrace it once they get used to it. But those first little baby steps in are very difficult. So what advice do you have for somebody who is, moving from an existing space, maybe small bays, to private rooms or rooms with walls that's really different?
I think you need to start from the beginning, and you need to bring in both your physician providers, if you're a trauma center, your trauma surgeons, because they have a different perspective as well, your nurses and your techs. And as you're looking at the blueprints, if you haven't been able to design it, it's something you've been given, is to have them start looking at where would you move through this? What makes sense? And start getting them thinking about the dynamics of the layout and making it as real as possible to them, because then they actually are engaged and own it. And I think the other thing that I realized with the emergency room was as we were constructing the building, every month I would send what I called a blog. And I would go into the building and I would take pictures. And at one point I took one of the nurses in and I had her spread her arms out to the side to show how big the new bays were compared to our current. So, and then I would juxtapose it against a picture of what we were currently in, which was about, 65 square feet, which I think was the California criteria for a bay with curtains on both sides, to show the difference, to start saying, look, you guys, you're going to have private rooms, and seeing one of their own in there, it started becoming real. And I did that every month with comments and where we were and what to expect next and what their piece of the work was going to be. And then as we got to substantial completion and started looking at fit up and our dress rehearsal, I went to a few different hospitals, courtesy of Kelly and her team, and saw some great, what do I call them? I guess supply carts that had built-in computers that made a ton of sense for the rooms. And I sent my manager for the ER up to look at it and say, what do you think? And, and they were like, this is great. And so when we got ready to sort of develop the room layout internally, we brought some of the nurses in. We asked nurses who'd like to participate. And they helped kind of figure out where things were. And then um, also the fun part was able to come back with color palettes and say, what do you like? So we were really lucky in that we got to be involved in a lot of the really minutia, but kind of the fun things. Oh yeah, I remember I picked that. You're like, yeah, you did. And I hate it. No. And they'd laugh. But then when we got ready for Fit Up, we had supply chain supporting us, but the nurses said, no, we want to do it because we're the ones who have to work in this environment. And I couldn't believe it that so many of them would volunteer to step forward and say, we want to figure out how this layout should work, what should go in each drawer. And it's interesting, probably a couple of years into there, I said, what would you have changed? And most everyone said nothing other than, gee, we wish we had a small procedure room right here. And we all agreed that we would have lost a bay, but that would have been really smart to have created that. We probably still can, but really just engaging them all the time and giving them as much information as you can, and challenge them to think about how they're going to work. And, they're smart people. So they really did like that. And the docs liked it because they felt like they had a say in what their world was going to look like.
Yeah, certainly sharing what the future is going to look like and having them participate and get those. I think both the staff who are excited about it, and I also think it's helpful to bring people who aren't quite so excited about it. So I always feel like if you find that one person in the room who's kind of snarling or kind of not really on board, if you can get them to get on board, you've really done a good job. So how has your role working in transition? So you're a hospital administrator and you manage multiple departments. So how has your experience with transition and project management helped you in your current role?
I think it's taught me to look at problems differently. That in transition, it's very dynamic. It's not a static state. And you have to constantly be thinking about how would you mitigate this? If you don't like the way this door is, but here it is, how can we work around that? And I think it's engaging that same thought process and then going back to the frontline staff and saying, how would you fix this problem? And I think engaging them creates a much different dynamic as an administrator and a much higher level of trust. Like they know that you want them to be involved in it. They don't always like it when you say, well, we can't do that because of financial or building codes or whatever. But I think it's really broadened my perspective on how you operationalize, either new equipment or new space or even a new S-bar. It's how you think about things a little bit differently. And so I have to say that it really did change how I think function as an administrator. And we are definitely at our hospital very much committed to management for daily improvement and sort of using that whole lean methodology and going in, every day rounding, forcing yourself every day to round for an hour and a half on units and talk to people and kind of listen. It really gives you a different perspective. And as we go forward now in our next transition, keeping that always in mind, I think it grounds you. It's kind of that touchstone of you're not sitting in an office, in the C-suite, you're out on the floors and, sometimes you're going to get hit hard, but that's okay. At least you're listening. And kind of, for me, I'm always thinking about how can I use this information as I go forward.
So one of the, you've been on 3 different projects, an ambulatory, an inpatient, emergency department. And I would say something that people ask us all the time is, well, when can we start doing tours? When can I get in the building? I can't do my workflow until I get in the building. And you have to do your workflow before you get in the building, right? Because, by the time the walls and stuff is up, like there's not going to be enough time. So when do you think is the ideal time, or do you have any best practices for, I know that you had very prescriptive things that you did when you did your tours. So when is an ideal time for you to bring that frontline staff in or managers in to start touring the building?
Well, I think something that I learned that I never really realized could work so well is doing a tabletop first with sort of understanding how things were going to move through, so that when you actually get into the building, and we did start tours relatively early with hard hats, because in California, our CDPH, California Department of Public Health, licensing was wanting to come in. So we were actually taking them through fairly early, when we were still pretty deep into construction, for them to understand paths of travel. And so once we did that and we saw the questions they were asking, we probably started thinking about bringing our staff in then. And I'm trying to think, it was months before substantial completion, and it was small groups. That was the other thing. You can't, when the welder is welding and there's little sparks flying, you really can't have a big group. But bringing in, to your point, sort of both your managers and established leaders and those in those departments who perhaps were a little more negative, to understand and see, to help engage them in, how are we going to move forward with workflow. So I don't think there's a perfect time. I think it depends on your facility. If it's a smaller outpatient facility, to me, I would probably bring them in earlier, just because, particularly if you're bringing people together from different sites or different departments, and putting them into one, kind of getting them used to being a new synergistic group. With a big hospital, even though they have to tour the whole building, all they really want to see is their unit, which is interesting, because you kind of are like, but you really have to be able to get to the OR, so we kind of need to show you this. But I think kind of honing it down initially and having them understand the layout of their unit, and then if you can bring them back twice to say, this is how you would move your patients through, your staff through, as well. And I think one of the funniest moments was on our first one. The physicians, 20% of your physicians have to go through fire life safety, and in the new building, if they work in the building predominantly. And the pushback, we don't have time, we can't possibly do this. And a cardiology group who was just adamant that they just weren't going to do this, and finally agreed to give me 20 minutes in a 4,000 square foot building. So I set a timer on, and I was flying them through the area. But they, wait, we want to see more. No, 20 minutes. That's all you wanted. So now you're going. And it's funny. Then later on, they were like, can we go back? So sort of agreeing to their terms initially, and then having them understand, truly the largesse of the project, I think is something that's important to say, sure, okay, if that's all you can do, great, that's all we'll do. But, then when they really see it and really start to understand it, it does change. And then those in that group who are really committed will go, okay, we got to do this. And, so I think it's important. I think tours are important. And I also think on the tours, if you start, again, using a checklist that Kelly, your group had created to get ready for fire life safety and to do scavenger hunts, to start kind of throwing that out there a little bit in those first tours. Oh, this is where, can you see, this is where your egress is and where you would go out. And, they don't really care, but it's important that they know it. So it's kind of starting to lay that foundation of, the dynamics of the facility.
So you mentioned tabletops, and we used to do finish our workflow and then do tabletops to test the new workflow. And we've found using tabletops, as you mentioned, early in the design, early when you can't get access. And we actually stumbled across doing tabletops at a different time when we weren't able to get in to do a dress rehearsal. And we did find it to be really valuable. So any thoughts on who to include in your tabletops, and then how much time did you spend? Was it an hour, 2 hours?
Well, I remember one particular tabletop, and we had a number of the physician leads in that area, and the nurse managers, some supervisors, and then I think there was 1 or 2 frontline staff. And you think, oh, we only need an hour. Actually, you need as much time as they're willing to give you, I think, to really look and understand flow, and challenge them to think, how would you staff this area and why? Does that make sense? Like you're talking about doing this. what are your thoughts around that? Oh, okay. Have you thought about other alternatives, kind of guiding them to look at flow a little differently? And, I think a couple of hours, and sometimes you do pick up on small nuances that can be fixed prior to moving in. A psych area, particularly an emergency department, shouldn't have one door. It should have a door in and a door out, so that for safety of your staff, and kind of identifying that. And like, well, if that door goes out to a back hallway, how do you maintain, that security, and kind of picking up on some of those, and how would you get to, your interventional radiology area from there? Oh, okay, well, and so once they get in the building, it's all of a sudden, is this the path we decided on? It's like, well, what do you think? And so it kind of sets up that sequela of thinking. And so when they do get in to do their first dress rehearsal, there is that sense of, yeah, this won't work, or boy, this we were spot on. And, sort of acknowledging that with them, like, boy, you guys really came up with, a great way to look at this. So,
yes, no, definitely having plan B, because I haven't been in a project ever where every workflow that we planned was exactly the way it was. So 100% agree to be flexible. And I know, again, like from lessons learned in doing tabletops, to find out as much as you can before you get in there. So that way you can really set the groundwork for the team to get oriented. Because I think what happens as project managers, or as if you're the transition lead from the hospital side or the ambulatory building, the space and where everything is, and you've been talking about it ad nauseum, but it's brand new, or it isn't at the top of everybody's brain. So we like to do an overview, introduce the staff to the entire building, and then to your point, now let's go to your space. Where do you fit in? Do a flyby or a flyover of their space. How do they enter? Where do they put their stuff? I know we always talk about lockers, parking, and badging in as things that staff absolutely want to know. So we have found to do those early has certainly helped. So lots of change in transition, and working with different types of staff. Are there any strategies that you've found that have been helpful when you're trying to orient somebody either to a new process, like you have to roll out a new EMR, you have to change. I mean, there's change. So what are your success stories or any strategies that you use to implement change?
I think one of the things is, there's always a group dynamic. And to your point, there are people that are so excited and engaged. There's sort of those in the middle who are just kind of observing. And then those who are like, I've done this the same way. I don't want to change. And, you can get, you don't want them to skew the group in terms of a negative outcome. So one of the things I do is when I start hearing that, what I'll immediately do is to say, God, I love the natural light here. Your patients are going to just be so excited by that. And what do you think? And all of a sudden it stops them, and they have to look at something that's very concrete and is really quite amazing, based on their prior. And I always, when I do work and do transition, I always say, hey, can I see your current unit? And I'll say, oh my gosh, are you just so excited about the change in having a supply cabinet or a larger med room or a nursing lounge that's actually seats more than 5 people, and trying to find something that they can glam onto that's a bit more of a positive, that can kind of stop that negative flow. And because everyone's like, well, where's my office and how come? And I'm like, I'm way too low in the food chain to know that. But one thing I did notice about these offices, they have like these wonderful comfy couches in there. How did you guys get that? And kind of trying to get them to look through a little bit of a different perspective. And I think, it really does help. I think it's, kind of using that and a little bit of humor. I think oftentimes will change the dynamics of a group. And then if it really continues, sort of pulling them inside, like, I really need your help. I know this is so critical that we're successful and that you feel comfortable in your new space. Can you help me to get there? And kind of it sort of stops them from, oh yeah, I guess I can't. I mean, you're so senior and you have so much experience, but you have to try to change that dynamic. So one of the things I always try to do is, you know, is, what are you trying to get out of today? If you're doing, let's say, a dress rehearsal, or what's your goal, or what's your priority, and what do you love about working here that, we want to bring over, and sort of setting a different tone for them to even move forward, I think is really important. I know it sounds kind of airy fairy and, oh my, it's so California, but there's something about that human connection, and kind of getting them back to the core of why they're moving and, what the thought process was. And then I think it's also being realistic to say, you can't change the real estate. This is it. And good, bad, or ugly, let's figure out how to make it, the best we can. Because occasionally you'll see something and think, even to yourself, I'm not sure what they were thinking when they did this, but okay, let's deal with it. And I think being pragmatic also is people appreciate, you don't try to totally rose color it. You say, yeah, that's going to be challenging. What's your current? Is it better? No, well, okay, let's see if we can do a workaround, kind of getting them to think about, MacGyvering it a bit.
Definitely. Healthcare workers are notorious for the workaround. And, kudos to all of them, because, you make do with what you have. So, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, but you're one of our most experienced project specialists. And I know I usually see the assignments and put them together and try to match our more challenging teams with our more seasoned, experienced facilitators. So what do you do, and do you have any advice for somebody who is a new facilitator who's going to come in and help prepare their team for a new space? Or a lot of times we work with the project management office or the PI team, and those folks are helping to facilitate. So how do you prepare, and what are the things that you do to get ready to facilitate?
Well, there's sort of three things that I've always done. And one is, if it's an area I'm unfamiliar with, I'll say, gosh, can you send me, let's say the OR, which is not my forte. Can you send me the ARN standards in this area, just so I can kind of understand what criteria they have to work under, and kind of getting to know their area a little bit, kind of going in and saying, no, this is not my area of expertise. If they ask you, do you work in this area? But, I have some questions for you guys around, X, Y, and Z, and sort of getting them to engage in that, sort of having at least enough knowledge to speak their language and ask some questions that draw them in immediately. I think the second thing is to really, as a facilitator, whoever really is leading the scenario, is to really support them in being seen as the leader. And, hey, get us started, go for it, manager, you got this, and a little bit part cheerleader, because you want them to see this person who is their leader. And sometimes they're quite young and new in that role, and encouraging them. And then when there's a break, saying, how do you think it's going? Maybe you want to focus on some of these things. I'm kind of hearing that, and encouraging them, but giving them, really positive feedback, but also some very structured feedback as you go forward. So that's the second thing, is encouraging the manager. And then I think the third thing is really reading the group. And if you have people who are just not really, they're watchers, and you can see the wheels turning to say, I noticed you were looking at this. What were you thinking? And sort of forcing them to engage, because sometimes you realize they have some of the best insights, and you have the ones who are always going to say something, right or wrong. And you have to really make sure that the whole group feels like they're participating in a way that's meaningful, and that will help actually bring them forward, so they'll be successful, when they actually activate. Because if you don't, it can really be challenging on that first day when they move in. So I think those are sort of the three things. One, learning about the area if you don't know about it, sort of doing some reading, going on their website. I've often gone on a hospital's website, looking at their mission and the kinds of patients they see, especially if it's a place you don't know very well. And then the second one is really supporting that leader of that day to really be successful. And then the third one is drawing in those who are not, maybe are shyer or kind of just trying to take it in, and you can tell they're deep thinkers. And it's like, okay, you definitely got something you're thinking about. Can you share it? And sometimes you just have to do that at the break or at lunch, and then all of a sudden you'll start seeing a difference as the scenarios go on throughout the day.
I love that. I've seen you do your debriefs where you go around in a circle and ask everybody, what's going on. So you review the issue list, clarifying it. As we know, it's very important to be clear about what exactly is what is an issue, what needs to be reported so that they can prioritize it. But really going around and hearing from each person from their perspective, because, sometimes there are very strong personalities or people who process very quickly and they speak up. And it is important to get the feedback of those people who are deep thinkers and need time to process before they speak. And so I think that's one of the great things that I've seen you do is, get that feedback and then incorporate it into the next session, because usually we do 3 sessions. So, doing that at the end and saving time and using a timekeeper to do that. So speaking of time, you have a very busy job. You need to tell us how many areas you manage, because it always blows my mind. And then I want to know, how do you keep it all together? So secrets for somebody who is either aspiring to be in a leadership position, and how do you manage your time and prioritize the things that you need to get done?
Well, I think the 3 pieces of advice I always say to sort of new leaders is, don't say no when they offer you something. Be honest and say, God, I'd love to try that. Or, I've got a lot going on right now. Can I start it on X? And give some really concrete timelines for when you can take on something new. But I think by being, blessed are those who are flexible, you'll never get bent out of shape, is, kind of always willing to try something new, because you'll always learn something from a new area. And I think clarifying, sometimes you get it in the interim, while you're recruiting for someone new, or sometimes you just get it forever. But I think it's how you grow in leadership and hospital administration is really taking on whatever is given to you, in that you start understanding the interplay between all the departments. I don't think I ever understood the whole sort of facilities relationship as much until I started doing transition. And now, the engineers are some of my favorite people, because, I can talk with them and sort of understand, our old building and our new building. And I think that's been really beneficial, to kind of seeing how the world through their eyes. So I think one thing is just, don't be afraid to say yes. There are times when you have to say yes, but not now, but really being open to it, because you'll think, really, I really want to run the diabetes program, shoot me. But, you end up learning so much about, A1C and the importance in the OR and how long. And it's like, oh, that's the sequela of that. And that's what can happen, and what does it put them at risk for? And then what's the dynamics of that? I think the second thing is, I'm a note taker, and that's so old school, but it's having whatever form it comes in, your own critical task list, whether if you do it electronically, whether you do it on pen and paper, but really tracking what you have to do and by when, because it forces you to not lose sight of all, sometimes the small stuff. Sometimes I'll write the littlest things down. I'll think, why did I write that down? I know to do that. It doesn't matter. It's really tracking, and people have different styles for it. Some people like to track by project. Some just like, your to-do list in a day. I think, every day I come into work and I look at my to-do list, and, I'm thrilled some days when I get one thing done on it, because, you end up firefighting, but it's always going back to it and not being afraid to say, was this follow-up okay? Do we need to do more? Because people are human, and sometimes, you don't beat yourself up on that. You just constantly are sort of tracking. So I would really say, whatever your style is, And a lot of my new managers now they carry around little books and they write things down. And I think it's very sweet because it's a very different generation that uses technology. But as we're moving through, it's a fast way, and they've seen me do it. And I don't know if they do it because of me or just because there's so much going on that you can't always get it on your computer and or your Palm Pilot, in the old days, or your phone, and then nowadays. So I think it's having a mechanism to track your work. I think the third thing is find your passion and find your joy. Like there are certain of my areas that I'm just like, okay, I just have to do this. But my other areas bring me so much joy that I can continue to support, the ones that are maybe not quite as interesting, like parking, versus, my emergency room or labor and delivery. And so I think it's sort of finding that balance. And that's the hardest thing. I think it's knowing what you love and, kind of parlaying that into other aspects of your job. And I think, anybody who's organized and has good follow through and good communication can really do it. I mean, but you have to pay attention to the details and you have to follow through. I mean, I think those are the biggest pieces of the world that make people crazy, when you don't do it. It's like,
It's funny you mentioned parking because one of the last dress rehearsals we did with Penn Med, I ended up in parking. And I have to say, it was like one of my favorite sessions. I ended up staying with them the entire time. And the logistics and things that they need to do in a very busy city to get the cars up, and everybody parks and everybody, wants to be close. So the logistics and things that they need to do and juggling keys and things. So I actually, like you, originally didn't have an appreciation of facilities and engineering, and a huge appreciation for what they do because they make everything happen. And in the same respect with parking. So maybe go spend a day with them. So you might find out, like, just it might be one of your exciting places. So you didn't mention the area. So what other areas do you oversee?
So currently, I have all of women's services, labor and delivery, postpartum, and antepartum, and I am the site liaison for our NICU, which is licensed under the Children's Hospital, but I work with them on a daily basis. The emergency department, which I've had for about 12 years, which my heart loves. All of respiratory therapy, imaging, environmental services, PTOT, speech, our concierge program, facilities, parking, engineering. Oh dear, if I've forgotten somebody, I'm going to feel terrible. Sort of most of the lab, oops, can't forget them, the ancillaries. And we have, in the past, I've had half of med surg, I had the neuro stroke trauma ICU. We kind of look at what makes sense in time. And so there were times when we needed different leadership in areas. So I would go into one area and we'd kind of trade off and, based on the volume of work. Now with definitely the tower taking up more time, it really was nice to be able to give med surg now is under all one senior director, which is great, instead of being divided among, 3 of us. So that was kind of a gift because that's a very different, challenging dynamic with throughput. But I'm glad I had it because it really helped me understand when the ER was saying we're holding patients, and then understanding the other side of it that they didn't. And, the two didn't seem to be able to talk to each other, which I think is a classic, sort of hospital problem.
Right.
But it did help me to understand it. And I think then to try to get them to work together differently, and, baby steps, as we both know, that I think some problems will never actually totally be resolved.
Your comment, I have huge appreciation for, and I think it took me a long time to learn this, is to say, yes, I would love to do this, but I can't do it right now. Or, what else is on my plate that I can give to somebody else so that I can accept that new challenge and learn something new. So I think that's another just part of this overall, like, time management and learning new spaces, because I think I've seen more than ever just these various departments that are under one person. And I'm like, how in the world did you end up with all of these departments? And then how do you keep it straight? How do you manage? So it would never it's never linear, it's never clean. I think, hospitals are complicated, and so as you mentioned, sometimes you inherit them because somebody went out on a leave, and then it just made sense because they didn't come back, or there was a reorganization and restructure, and then you end up with these new spots. So love that bit of advice. So final question for you. So you've been in many, many different roles and have had a progressive trajectory in your career. So what advice do you have for somebody who would like to get into either like the project management side or the management side and healthcare?
Well, I think if there's somebody currently working in healthcare who's interested in project management, is identifying a project that's going on and asking if you can participate, and just sort of starting to learn those dynamics. I also think, going through the Lean Six Sigma process and kind of understanding the components of that. It's nice to have those tools because it does force you to, as tedious as it can be sometimes, is to really get in there and start tracking whether it's, I did a capstone on turnover times in the emergency in the ORs, and spent 2 consecutive days, 12 hours days in ORs, timing and watching. And I think if you volunteer to work on something like that, you start to learn the components of project management. And we all love to solution jump and problem solve. That's why we're kind of in the field we are. But really taking the time to pull the data, analyze it, and engaging the right people, I think is critical. So if you're in healthcare and you want to get into project managers, there's always a project going on in a hospital, whether it's just something small like, starting IVs with ultrasounds, right? It's still a project. There's a beginning and a middle and end. And if you're a nurse on that unit, hey, can I help? Can I be a super user? And being with the project from beginning to end. Let's say you're a frontline nurse. If you're someone who is non-clinical, there are still components of interdisciplinary that are needed in larger projects. Is volunteering to work on those, if you can fit it into your schedule, so that you can start understanding how in your organization that's dealt with. Who handles the project management, because sometimes it can be a leader from a unit, and sometimes it can be somebody from your project management office if you have one. So I think it's starting to do that. And I think that it starts helping you ground you and sort of understanding the dynamics, and then what tools do you need? There's great books out there to read. Certainly the ones you guys have done on transition it's like a recipe book. I mean, if you really follow the process, it works. And you can go off a little bit, based on your organization's culture, but not much, and I think sort of reading and learning that way helps. If you want to get into hospital administration, we both know that, hospitals are degree, driven environments. Is, get a master's degree, get your bachelor's if you're a nurse, a bachelor's if you're a respiratory therapist, and you're still wanting to go into management, and then continue on, get an advanced degree, get a certification. I mean, it's important you learn and show that you have that willingness and you can be successful. I think, we're a magnet hospital, and we encourage everybody to get a certification. And it's your professionalism and your pride in being, a nurse at the highest level. And, with a target of 80% of your nurses, and if you have 10,000 nurses, that's a lot of nurses that have to get it. But it's really saying this is important for you professionally and personally, and for us as an organization. And it's also a way to say, what are your next steps? For all my nurse managers in their goals, in their evaluations, I always say, what do you want to do this year? What are your goals? And then at 6 months, we have a touch base on just that. So where are you on that? And how do you feel about it? And it's funny how they start challenging themselves to think differently for professional growth and development. I do with my manager of respiratory, and, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And some of them are married with babies, don't talk to me. And I'm like, great, that's okay, that you can do that. We'll find your balance. But really encouraging that generation who does want to do it, and saying, I've had people say to me, I think I want to go into administration. I go, well, you're welcome to shadow me for a day. And I've had some
Mm-hmm.
after the day going, yeah, thank you, but no, there is no way I'd ever want to do this job. They realize it's not for them. And there's ones that are going, oh, I like this. I'm like, okay, so what could you do? And, kind of really creating the environment to help them grow. So I think take advantage of opportunities that are offered to you, put yourself out, talk to your CEO and saying, I'd really love to get involved with some of this. Where do you see me fitting in? And don't be afraid to talk to your executives and say, tell them what you're looking at. We're always looking for people who are excited and engaged and want to grow. So I think I know you've had interns working for you. You've hired some of them because they've been dynamic. And it's a great way, to kind of start your career path a little bit differently.
Yeah, excellent, excellent advice. And I, was in a master's program where I got to do internships, and I obviously we support them and believe in them, but it is great, as you said, because I thought that I wanted to teach, and I had the opportunity to teach and realized I'm not a good teacher. It's not my cup of tea. So, kudos to all of the educators, because I've had fabulous professors that I continue to keep in touch with and who really drove me to do things that I didn't want to do, but also having mentors and having interns. It's wonderful. So thank you for that. So now we're going to move into our rapid fire. So
okay,
you can drink your tea and get your mind set for this. So we'll start off easy. So texting or talking?
Talking.
Favorite city in the world?
Paris.
Place that you most want to travel to?
Bali.
Oh, I've never been there.
I know, me either.
Favorite junk food?
Oh, any kind of potato chip.
Love chips. How about your favorite childhood TV show?
Oh, favorite TV show. Boy, that's tough. Well, I think my guilty pleasures are right now NCIS Hawaii and Magnum PI, because they're both in Hawaii, and they're just light and fun and so different than my world. So right now, those, I have to admit, I'm hooked on both of those.
I love it. How about your favorite season?
Oh, spring, summer. It's always a toss-up. Warm and when you're outside all the time.
I love the color changing and the flowers. So would you rather cuddle a baby panda or a baby penguin?
Oh, a panda. Oh my gosh, of course.
And what's your favorite type of muffin?
Probably lemon poppy seed.
Ooh, me too. And Godfather or Star Wars?
Star Wars.
Oh, I'm a Godfather girl. All right. Well, thank you, Kim. Appreciate your time. So if people want to connect with you, can you share your LinkedIn profile information?
I can. Absolutely. I'd be delighted. It's Kimberly Roberts, and I'm at Scripps Memorial Hospital, La Jolla. I'm pretty easy to find.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's going to do it for our episode of Transition Tea. And in our next episode, we'll be joined by another healthcare leader to chat over a cup of best practices. We'll pour over new insights and steep the next blend of transition and activation expertise. So we thank you for listening. And if you want to hear more conversations like this one, please subscribe to Transition Tea wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to see the live videos of our recordings, you can follow us on our Yellow Brick YouTube channel. So until the next time, cheers.
Cheers.